For more on the state of U.S.-Iranian relations, I'm joined by CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan, and to my right, retired Marine General Frank McKenzie, who most recently served as the commander of the United States Central Command. Let me start with you, General. It's great to have you with us. I appreciate your time. I hope you heard Charlie Daggett describing everything that's in the region. Why would we have so much deployed there if we weren't on the cusp of doing something kinetic in Iran?
Well, the Iranians are people who count things. For us to have a credible threat against them, you have to bring that in. I actually am not of the opinion that it's necessarily going to be used. But the Iranians are going to look at it. They're going to understand the correlation of forces, is the phrase they would use to describe it. So you need that combat capability there, as also as described, not only to strike Iran, but to be able to defend ourselves against a probable Iranian counterstrike. So all that is very much necessary if we're going to execute these kinds of operations, or more directly, I would say, support the diplomacy that's ongoing with a fist behind it.
General, you said something I want to follow up on, because several guests on this program this week have said there are times when there is so much deployed, with it comes a kind of inevitability. You would argue it's not inevitable. There are still plenty of decisions before the president, but you just said you don't think it's necessarily certain that something's going to happen. Tell my audience why.
Major, I've actually been with President Trump when he made three big decisions. I was with him when he made the decision not to strike after our RQ-4 drone was shot down by the Iranians in the summer of 2019. There were lots of reasons to strike Iran then. I actually recommended that we did strike Iran. He chose not to do that, and he had good reason for doing that. I was part of the decision-making process when he chose to strike Qasem Soleimani, and that was the right decision at the right time and for the right reasons. And a week later, when the Iranians attacked our base at al-Assad in Iraq, no lethalities occurred. People were injured as a result of that, but no lethalities occurred. I watched President Trump, and what I thought was frankly a very statesmanlike action, walk away from continued escalation with Iran. So I would tell you he carries a couple of advantages into this. First of all, he has actually attacked Iran. He did it with Qasem Soleimani back in 2000, and he did it with last summer with our strike on the nuclear program. No other American president's ever done that. That's a powerful tool in his pocket as he approaches these negotiations. At the same time, I very much believe he's his own man when it comes to these kinds of decisions, and I think he will eventually come to some calculus internal himself. He won't. I don't believe he'll be overcome by the flow of military hardware into the region.
It's a perspective that we are very, very grateful to have, General. Margaret, I want to talk to you about something that MT has mentioned. Because after the conversations today in Geneva, there was references to technical teams and bringing in the IAEA as a monitoring. Right. Does that signal something to you that's important or meaningful that we should latch on to?
Yes. President Trump wants a deal, and he's bringing in some technical experts that could help make that happen. But the bottom line from today, from the 6 hours they spent talking, is that negotiators just bought more time for President Trump to make that decision on what to do next. And by the way, for Iran's supreme leader to make a decision here, too. For Trump, he's weighing a few risks, political and national security. One is, do you run the risk of escalating military conflict at a time when there is not a clear and imminent threat to the United States, or at least none that has been explained to the public? Or do you run the risk of throwing a lifeline to a regime that is on the back foot, under a lot of economic pressure, and that lifeline is a diplomatic deal that allows them to stay in place and give them sanctions relief? Here's what we know. Iran wants to enrich uranium at levels that they could use for medical purposes, so that would be below bomb-grade material, right. But still gives them a capability that some may not be comfortable with. They don't want to talk about ballistic missiles. So this is not the comprehensive deal that Secretary Rubio says they want to get to. At the same time, and by the way, that's what the threat is to American allies, is the ballistic missiles. The Israelis are very concerned about that. At the same time, the American wish list that we know about is a deal that doesn't expire and that provides a way to verify Iran will not ever pursue a nuclear weapon. So when I talk to my sources about the military options out there, they point back to Secretary Rubio saying this is a defensive posture, something that General McKenzie might have been nodding to there. And they really say, look, this is a broad range because we don't know what the president's intent here is. Does he just want to eliminate a threat to allies with the ballistic missile program? Does he actually want to hit nuclear sites? Does he want to carry out regime change? In which case, maybe you do want to wait for that entire posture to be in place by mid-March. And by the way, in terms of informing the American public, we do have a date on the calendar. March 18th is scheduled to be the next time that Congress gets a public briefing on the latest U.S. intelligence assessment. The last one we got last March said that Iran had not decided to build a nuclear weapon. And we also know that the Defense Intelligence Agency says they won't have a ballistic missile that could hit the United States until 2035. Do those assessments stand? That could be decisive. If they've changed, the public and Congress have not been informed.
Excellent stuff, Margaret, as always. General McKenzie, you have a unique perspective on this. There have been others on my program this week who said, you know, it would be hard for President Trump to not do anything militarily. He might lose face or respect after deploying all of these assets and not following through. Their words, not mine. Evaluate that based on your interactions and observations of the judgment calls President Trump has made in the past.
I simply think he will not be driven by the forces in the region. We were very close to striking Iraq in 2019. I mean, about as close as you can get when he decided not to do it. He's not afraid to make that call. And then I watched him make the same call after the strike on al-Assad. I think he's very much comfortable with those decisions. I would tell you this. Again, the fact that he has struck Iran hard with the blow against Qasem Soleimani and then the strike against the nuclear program, and he's the only president that's really done that, that's a powerful variable that Iranian leaders have to evaluate, and so that gives him, I think, a lot of room for decision making here, a lot of space that would probably not be available to other American presidents, frankly.
Very quickly, General, you've been party, I would assume, to conversations like this. Regime change has been something on the minds of U.S. governments in the past. Do you think it's achievable? And do you think that there are more opportunities if it comes than risks?
I think it's very hard to see regime change in Iran. I think it's easier to try to modify existing behavior, and those are going to be small steps. I agree with the discussion about their ballistic missiles. The crown jewel of the Iranian defensive concept are their ballistic missiles. In order to have effect, you need to limit those. They would come down and be, I think, more hard over on protecting their ballistic missiles actually than their nuclear program. But there's the key right there, and there's where we need to work because they can strike this afternoon.
I appreciate your time and expertise very much. General Frank McKenzie, Margaret Brennan, always a pleasure. Fantastic.